Much. Well, Anthony Fry is chairman of the BBC Trust's Finance Committee. A blizzard of rhetoric, perhaps, from you? I don't know. Can you explain why the Trust wasn't getting a grip of this? You've been there since 2008. Did you discuss at least the way that these severance payments were being handled?
Well, Caroline, thank you very much. Let me start by saying that whilst we find the conclusions of the NAO report, which we commissioned, deeply worrying, we nonetheless welcome its conclusions, and we welcome the fact that the Director General this morning has made very clear what his position is going forward on the back of previous policy statements he's made.
Does his predecessor then have questions to answer, as Rob Wilson was suggesting?
I think the important thing to recognise in all of this, and one of the challenges you gave me, was how the Trust fits into this picture, is that the Royal Charter, as you know, specifically prevents the BBC Trust from getting involved in any matters relating to remuneration other than that of the Director General himself. That was set up for very good reasons. It was set up because of a feeling post-Hutton that the BBC Trust, or the governors, were far too close to management, and it was believed that by separating the responsibility of the governing body, the Trust, from the day-to-day management of the BBC, these sort of problems of closeness would be avoided.
But did none of you think, look, hang on, these are massive payments at a time when the BBC is cutting back all round?
I think we have to distinguish between two things here. The first is the Trust was very clear in setting a policy and strategy framework for the BBC that addressed the issue of the number of senior managers. And the BBC was made it very clear by the BBC Trust they had to do something about the number of senior managers. There is then two separate issues. There is the issue of the amount that people were contractually entitled to, which in many cases were very large amounts of money. And I'm absolutely clear that from a licence fee payer's perspective, those amounts of money appear to be shocking.
Yes, indeed. Some of them, one severance payment of £219,000 was £141,000 more than the individual was entitled to.
And indeed, that's the second part. So the contractual payments which were made, the thing that is particularly worrying in my view is the payments that were made outside of policy, and more importantly, often made without the proper authorities.
So who was responsible for that?
Well, as you know, the responsibility for the question of individual payments was made at a number of different levels. They were made obviously through the Executive Remuneration Committee, which comprised a series of external non-executive directors.
And will they be held accountable?
As you can see from the letter we've written today to the Director General, we've asked the Director General, who has, as Rob Wilson correctly identified, put in place a series of new policy frameworks. We have asked him to give us assurance that what has happened in the past cannot happen in the future, and to give us assurance that the structures that were put in place, which clearly didn't operate, and I agree totally with Rob Wilson on this point, they clearly did not operate within the BBC, that will not happen again. I think that it is very important, and I agree that the question of trust in the BBC does relate to these sort of issues. It is very important that the policies that were put in place to continue to reduce senior manager numbers and to continue to put pressure downward on pay are implemented by the new Director General.
The NAO highlight one case of an individual who sent a cheque to the BBC back saying they wouldn't want to benefit from a payment that could not be, quote, demonstrated to be fully and appropriately authorised. Would you call on others whose payments breach policies in the same way to do the same?
I'm not going to comment on individual cases.
Well, what about that case?
Clearly,
commendable?
I would not say it's not commendable. It's not for me to ask other people to determine what they think their position is. What I think it does demonstrate, however, is that there are cases here where people receive payments to which they were not contractually entitled, and which I think more worryingly, permission was granted without the necessary authorisation.
It is the case, isn't it, that since Lord Patten became chairman of the Trust, the average payoff has actually grown. It was $183,000 in 2011 to 12, $191,000 in 12 to 13. Doesn't this raise further questions about the Trust's credibility?
I think that's a matter of some mathematical calculations. I think the more
the
important
element... The figures are clear, 183 to 191.
Indeed, but I think that you're assuming there that it's because the payouts are growing for some reason. I think what you actually find is the speed with which people are being taken out of the corporation at the senior level. Let's not forget what the National Auditor's Office makes very clear is the overall policy of the BBC in regard to the reduction of senior managers is a step in the right direction, and has made clear that the overall reduction in the amount of the number of managers will represent value for money. I totally endorse, however, their conclusion that some of these payouts were simply not justified.
Anthony Fry from the BBC Trust's Finance Committee, thank you very much.